Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we must move quicker, because the sands of an hourglass are slipping through fast, each grain falling heavy as lead, whispering the name of a girl who could not control her rage, who let her jealousy burn so hot that it scorched every path she touched, including the one that would eventually lead her straight to the death chamber. So come, drift with me now to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the winter of 1995 was cold enough to see your breath, and cold enough to carry the last cries of a dying 19-year-old girl through the trees. It was here that Christa Pike, barely 18 years old herself, lured another into the woods and gave in to her dark, sadistic, violent nature. Christa Pike did not come from light. Her life began in the cracks of broken homes, where stability was a stranger and love wore thin. She dropped out of high school, a young woman already marked by neglect and poor choices. When she found her way into Knoxville's Job Corps in 1995, it was supposed to be a second chance. Job Corps, a place meant for rebuilding, where young people were given dorm rooms and vocational training, where futures could be written anew. But beneath the promise was another truth. Dormitories, where rumors grew like weeds, where fragile lives collided, and where crime too often flourished. It was here that Christa met Tadderell Shipp, a 17-year-old, with whom she found not healing, but obsession. Their bond tightened quickly, sealed with devotion and shadow. Together, they drifted into the occult, toying with symbols of Satan, carving darkness into their romance. Christa fed on it, nurtured by her own volatility, and it gave her a sense of control she had never known before. And then came Colleen Slemmer, 19, new to Job Corps, a Florida girl just trying to find her footing. In Colleen, Christa saw not a classmate, not a peer, but a rival. She became convinced that Colleen was circling Tadderell, trying to lure him away. Those who knew Colleen said it wasn't true, but truth no longer mattered. Christa's mind had already set the stage. Jealousy is a hungry thing, and hers demanded blood. To Tadderell, she whispered her resolve. That girl has to be taught a lesson. And in that single promise, the hourglass was turned upside down. The first grains of madness began to fall. The plan was simple and cruel. Christa enlisted her friend Shadola Peterson, 18, to play her part. Together, they whispered their scheme. Lure Colleen away from the safety of the dorms. Lead her past the campus edges and into the quiet woods where no one would hear her cries. They chose the old steam plant, an abandoned husk of iron and brick swallowed by trees. It stood just far enough from campus to be forgotten, yet close enough for a walk beneath the night sky. The perfect place, secluded, silent, with shadows deep enough to hide murder. On January 12th, 1995, Christa extended her hand like a false olive branch. She told Colleen she wanted to smoke a little weed with her, wanted to clear the air, to put the rumors to rest. A peace offering. Colleen, perhaps weary of the tension, perhaps naive to the danger, agreed. She signed out of the dormitory, not knowing it would be her last time. With her walked Christa, Tadderell Shipp, and Shadola Peterson. 3 shadows escorting her down a jogging trail toward oblivion. But Christa carried more than words that night. Tucked into her pocket was a box cutter. Hidden at her side, a small meat cleaver. The promise of violence clinked softly like coins in a purse. As the group left the campus, lights behind, the forest swallowed them whole. The night closed in, The trees creaked in the winter air, and Colleen stepped into a silence that was not meant to be broken by peace, but by screams. The hourglass drained faster now. The wood stood silent, holding its breath. At first it was only words, Christa accusing Colleen of chasing Tadarul, spitting jealousy into the night air. Colleen denied it, her voice fragile, but Christa's rage had already eclipsed reason. The first blow was sudden. A knee drove into Colleen's face. The taste of iron filled her mouth as Christa drew the cleaver. With a slash across her stomach, the peace was broken forever. Ship stepped in, his blade finding her chest, and from there, cruelty became ritual. For 30, maybe 40 minutes, Colleen endured the storm. Box cutter, cleaver, fists, boots, stabbing, slashing, striking. They taunted her as she cried for mercy, her pleas lost to the indifferent trees. Peterson stood apart, a witness, her silence complicit. When exhaustion set in, Christa's sadism sharpened. Together with Ship, she pinned Colleen to the ground. Slowly, deliberately, Christa carved a pentagram into her chest, a mark of darkness etched into living flesh. Colleen was still alive, trembling, bleeding, her young life clinging to the edges of a body breaking apart. And then came the end. Christa reached down and seized a jagged piece of asphalt, heavy and crude. She brought it down on Colleen's skull, once, twice, again and again. The forest echoed with the wet finality of each strike, until silence reclaimed the air. When it was over, Christa bent low, as though claiming a prize. She reached into the ruin of Colleen's head and plucked free a shard of bone, a fragment of skull. She tucked it into her pocket, blood still clinging to its surface, a macabre trophy to show the world what she had done. The hourglass spilled quickly now, its sand heavy with death, and in those woods, beneath the empty sky, Colleen Slemmer's life came to its end. If the woods had buried her secret, Christa Pike might have lived in the shadows a while longer. But Christa was not built for silence. She needed an audience. She needed to be admired or feared. When she walked back into the dormitory, the blood of Colleen Slemmer still drying on her clothes, she did not hide. She laughed. She bragged. To anyone who would listen, she painted her cruelty in vivid strokes. She boasted of the torture, of the screams, of the pentagram carved into soft flesh. And then she revealed her prize. From her pocket, Christa drew out the small fragment of skull she had taken, a keepsake of murder, paraded in her palm like a jewel. Students recoiled, but they remembered. Word spread like smoke on the wind. By dawn, the woods had given up their secret. Colleen's body was found, mutilated and abandoned near the steam plant. The scene told its own story. Slash marks, the carved pentagram, the shattered skull. When detectives stepped onto campus, the whispers already had a name. Christa Pike. Witness after witness repeated the same words. That she had bragged, that she had mocked Colleen, that she had kept a piece of bone as a souvenir. It did not take long. A search of her room turned up the skull fragment, crimson-stained and damning. Within hours, Christa was in handcuffs. Her downfall was not the work of police brilliance, but her own arrogance. She had needed the world to know, needed others to bear witness to what she had done. And so she signed her own warrant with her laughter. The hourglass tipped further, the sands racing faster. Christa Pike was no longer a predator in the shadows. She was prey in the cold light of justice. The trial of Christa Gale Pike opened in 1996, just a year after Colleen Slemmer's screams faded into the Knoxville woods. The courtroom was heavy with expectation, and the air carried the kind of silence that follows tragedy. The silence of families waiting for justice, of jurors bracing to hear the details no one should have to imagine. Prosecutors needed little embellishment. The evidence was grotesque and overwhelming. The fragment of skull found in Christa's pocket, the testimonies of students who had heard her boasts, the brutal reality of Colleen's body. Stabbed, slashed, marked, and beaten into silence. Witnesses spoke of her laughter in the dorms, her brash descriptions of the killing, her need to brag. She was not a reluctant killer, they said. She was proud. She wanted everyone to know. The jury looked at the girl before them. Only 20 years old, her face still carrying the softness of youth, and saw no innocence. They saw the cruelty carved into flesh, the arrogance that spilled from her tongue, the utter lack of remorse. It did not take them long. Christa Pike was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy. And then came the sentence, one that rang louder than any gavel. Death. At just 20 years old, Christa became the youngest woman on death row in the United States since the death penalty had been reinstated. Her accomplices fared differently. Darrell Shipp, 17 at the time of the murder, was spared execution by the Shield of Youth. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Shadola Peterson, who had gone along but struck no blow, received probation for accessory after the fact. But Christa, the jealous hand, the brutal strike, the pocketed fragment of bone, she bore the full weight of the verdict. The hourglass shifted again. This time, it would drain over decades, its grains falling in a lonely cell as the youngest woman in America waited for death. Prison bars did not tame Christa Pike. If the jury believed a death sentence would quiet her rage, they misjudged the girl who had bragged about a skull in her pocket. At the Tennessee Prison for Women, she quickly proved herself dangerous. In 2001, 6 years into her sentence, Pike slipped a shoelace around the neck of another inmate and pulled tight. The woman survived, but only barely. For the attack, Christa was convicted of attempted first-degree murder and received another 25 years tacked onto her record. Even in chains, she chased cruelty. A decade later, another headline rose like smoke. In 2012, state officials uncovered an escape plan that sounded ripped from the pages of a thriller. An outsider conspired with a corrections officer to duplicate keys and free Pike from her cell. Money exchanged hands. Promises were made. But the plot collapsed before it could begin, and Christa remained exactly where the court had left her, in her cage, staring at the walls. Yet her confinement was unlike any other. As the only woman sentenced to death in Tennessee, Christa lived in a kind of endless solitary. Decades passed with her in near-complete isolation. Her only company, the echoes of her own thoughts, and the grains of sand slipping through the hourglass. Some argued it was cruel to keep a young woman so alone. Others argued it was the only way to keep both her and those around her safe. Christa Pike had shown, time and again, that she could not be trusted with freedom. Not in the dorms of Job Corps, not in the woods of Knoxville, and not even behind razor wire and concrete. Then, in March of 2024, came the final decree. The Tennessee Supreme Court set her execution date for September 30th, 2026. If carried out, it will make Christa Pike the first woman executed in Tennessee in more than 2 centuries. But as her hourglass empties, a cruel twist remains. While Christa counts her last grains of time, her accomplice, Tadderall Ship, may soon walk free, his parole eligibility drawing near. Ironically, 1 month after she is assigned to taste death. The sands fall softly now, each grain a heartbeat, each breath one closer to the end. Christa Pike entered the woods in 1995, an angry, jealous girl, and emerged a murderer who laughed at what she had done. She carried a fragment of skull as a souvenir, as if cruelty itself could be pocketed, as if death could be owned. But cruelty has a way of echoing back. It followed her into the courtroom, where her youth could not shield her from the truth. It followed her into prison, where even behind bars her hands reached for another throat, and it follows her still as she sits in her cell, the lone woman on Tennessee's death row, counting down the days until the last grain falls. Her victim, Colleen Slemmer, was 19, a girl with her whole life ahead, silenced in a storm of jealousy she never earned. Tonight, it is Colleen's voice we remember in the Firelight, not Christa's arrogance, not her trophy, but the life that was stolen in the woods of Knoxville. On September 30th, 2026, the Hourglass is set to run dry. Christa Pike will face the punishment the jury handed her nearly 3 decades ago. Whether one believes in mercy, in justice, or in something darker still, her hourglass is almost empty. Which makes one wonder, which is worse, the swift blow of death that snatches the soul in an instant, or the slow knowledge that death is the only road left. The hourglass does not hurry for the condemned. Its grains fall one by one, whispering louder than thunder, each a knock at the door of doom. Time itself becomes a warden, and every breath a rehearsal for the last.
Thanks for listening. This has been Fireside Crime Stories, where the darkest tales are always read by Firelight. If you haven't already, subscribe, and before you drift off, toss a little fuel on the fire. Hit that like button, ring that bell, so when the shadows shift again, you'll be the first to know that another fire's burning and another story's being told. Until next time, rest well.